Okay, afternoon, evening, good morning, wherever you are. Really interesting things have happened in the last few hours, actually. Obviously, Penrith beating the Sydney Roosters 29 points to 28 in the first finals match of the NRL final series. Went down literally to the last minute. Um, so that's an interesting one. Obviously, we've had the allegations about Sam Burgess and the allegations of drug misuse, cover up of tests, domestic violence, and he's now been stood down by the South Sydney Rabbitohs going into their finals match at the weekend against the Newcastle Knights. That's a big breaking news story. The Tennessee Titans in the NFL having players test positive for the coronavirus, so that's hot on the agenda as well. Obviously, the announcement of the European group stages of the Champions League and Europa League, they've been announced. Be interesting to see how the Champions League and Europa League plays out, considering the current lockdown measures across Europe, and then how many of those games actually get played. There's a rescue package for the National League in football. So that's going to be interesting. I can't believe they've already announced that the Super Bowl is going to have 100% capacity, considering that the President of the United States has just tested positive for the coronavirus, and the fact that we've had a whole host of Tennessee Titans players test positive as well, leading to a postponement of a match. So I can't see that taking place. I mean, it's look, if we've got no crowds in Europe and non full and capacities in Australia and New Zealand being limited in percentage of stadium capacity, I can't see that going ahead as planned. That's wishful thinking by the NFL on their part. I think that's quite a dangerous kind of thing. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen over the next weeks, months. I think that's wishful thinking by the NFL, but the NFL, obviously, that's their main product, isn't it? It's the Super Bowl. It's the biggest moneymaker the NFL has. The NHL, I wouldn't say with the best league. I mean, the NRL and the AFL in Australia got going earlier, got fans back into stadiums earlier, having been slowly increasing capacities over the last few months. And at the end of the day, while the NHL in North America handled it very, very well, and I'll agree with that, the NHL did handle, um, you know, the NHL decided to go with the bubble plan. That was well founded. I think they were looking at how other leagues were dealing with things. Um, the fact that it took so long to get play restarted, and they had to change the format of not continuing with playing regular season games, going with a 2014 playoff kind of format, the play-in round. I think that could be something that's here to stay. We don't know exactly when the NHL is going to start the 2020-2021 season. It's going to be very, very interesting to see what plays out with the NHL. But we know Major League Rugby have announced they're returning at the end of March. So other leagues have decided not to carry on with this season this year and just go, right, we're going to scrap it. Other leagues have decided to suspend play and come back. But I do think the NHL, as a North American leagues go, dealt with things very, very well. But I think the best leagues to deal with the whole pandemic were the NRL and the AFL. Their shutdowns were shorter. They had much clearer uh, dealings with local government and national government in order to get sport restarted. We've also seen that South Africa have decided to withdraw from Super Rugby. That's having massive consequences because they're aiming to expand the Pro League and bring 4 South African teams into the Pro League. The Cheetahs, the Free State Cheetahs, are planning to take the South African Rugby Union to court over that. The Southern Kings have been liquidated, so rugby union is in a state of flux in the Southern Hemisphere. Super Rugby was in dire trouble before coronavirus financially. It was unsustainable, and there was a breakdown in relations with the South African Rugby Union and New Zealand and Australia. So Super Rugby as a format is just going to change going forward. That's going to be really interesting to see what plays out there. Macclesfield have been wound up. I don't think they exist anymore. They have gone bust. but they were badly owned. Poor ownership is part of the reason for that. I think it was inevitable considering how it had dragged out throughout last season. This has not just happened because of coronavirus. The ownership there, lots of things have gone on there that shouldn't have been allowed to continue. But again, poor governance. You wouldn't have the issues of Bury and Macclesfield and other clubs going into administration if there was much stronger governance from the EFL, the FA, and the Premier League. That's my personal opinion on it. I think the governance has been weak for a very, very long time, and financial mismanagement has been allowed to continue for a very, very long time. And yes, I understand that professional sports gets black. Professional sport obviously is big business. Let's sort out my betting. I understand that professional sport is big business and can make a lot of money, but what we've seen with the mass financial mismanagement across the board, predominantly in football, but also rugby union as well, is starting to feel the impacts of poor financial management and poor governance. It's starting to be felt. So the Macclesfield situation, whether they can reform and do a Rangers and reform as a club again, we'll wait and see. But that was on the cards long before coronavirus. There are issues with points deductions and for failure to pay players on time, for failure to fulfil fixtures. Predated the lockdown. We're going back to February and December last year. There were issues that were being highlighted. There had been long-standing problems that could not be concealed anymore. So yes, if you're a Stevenage Borough fan, you can be happy your club is still in the Football League via the fact that Macclesfield has gone bust, but Southend United are the next club facing a winding up petition by the High Court. We've seen a whole host of clubs have to go through this, and the stark warning from the Huddersfield owner back in April, May time that 50 or 60 clubs could go bust before the end of this season is starting to have an effect. There's a rescue plan announced for the National League. There's still debate going over whether the Premier League and the Football League can come to some sort of financial rescue deal. But the whole thing is up in the air. Is Oscar Pistorius still in prison? I believe so, but I haven't really followed the Oscar Pistorius story since he was convicted of his offences, plain and simple. I think. Oh, my new job. Well, I did a day's contract job up on Tuesday. I'll start my new job Monday, so I've got all confirmation through about the training and start dates. So I'm going to be back in work from next week. So it's been a horrible 3 weeks out of work. Not going to lie, it's not been particularly pleasant. I could have done videos every day on YouTube, but I just didn't have things going. Things outside of YouTube had to take precedence. So yeah, it's nice to have a start date and get back into work and earn some money again. But I got a nice payout from my old job, and I got some other money back from my previous flat rental. So outside of YouTube, things have started to look up. So we'll get there. On the side of the Sam Burgess, which we can now talk about, the Sam Burgess allegations, but very interesting timing by the Australian press in the release of the allegations. Apparently, the Australian, which is a major Australian newspaper, who would have thought that with the name like the Australian, they've been doing some undercover investigative journalism for about 4 months. So this goes back to the resumption of play in regards to Sam Burgess, and some of the allegations date back to 2017. So this is not like stuff that's just happened with Sam Burgess. From the information that I've found online in the Australian media and from press releases, is that there's been allegations of domestic violence, which the NRL has a policy on that. And as he is technically still registered as a player, even though he's actually a development coach, because his contract runs until 2022, I believe, with South Sydney. He was playing at the time in 2017 through to 2019 when he retired due to a shoulder injury. There were some rumours circulating that he may attempt to return back to play. He's from Dewsbury. Yes, he's from Yorkshire. He's from Dewsbury. There was some speculation that he may return back to play for next season because he's still technically contracted to the South Sydney Rabbitohs as a player, even though he's now a development coach. So there were allegations dating back to 2017 to do with domestic violence and drug misuse. There's also allegations that the South Sydney Rabbitohs ownership, including Russell Crowe, were aware of these allegations of drug misuse, and that they covered up some of his positive tests because he was still an active player until this time last year. So that is currently rumbling on and could have major implications on the South Sydney Rabbitohs going forward. The NRO Integrity Unit is investigating. It's what we are aware of. He has stood down from his coaching role as development coach at South Sydney. He's also stood down from his duties at Fox Sports, which is one of the major broadcasters of the NRL. So that is a big developing story, but the timing I find is very, very interesting. Very, very interesting to do with the timing of these allegations coming out days. We're talking days before South Sydney play their finals match um, against the Newcastle Knights. Is really interesting timing. Very, very interesting timing. Considering only a few weeks ago there were reports that he may consider having another medical opinion on his shoulder and coming back to play and finishing out his playing contract and reactivating his playing contract. So that's very, very interesting timing, and we'll have to see how it plays out. But initial reports are that the police are investigating and the NRL, and it raises the question of athlete welfare, and it raises the question of the transparency of drugs testing, and it does raise concerns about the culture within South Sydney Rabbitohs organisation going forward. It's a big breaking news story down under, but it does have implications because obviously Sam Burgess is part of that coaching setup now, and we'll have to see what happens and whether more heads will roll. But he's not the first rugby league player to have drug allegations against them. Andrew Joey Johns famously was arrested on the London Tube carrying ecstasy tablets on his person, and famously did admit that throughout his career he had issues with substance abuse. So this is not a new issue for rugby league. So a new issue for the NRL, for players misbehaving as well. Domestic violence allegations. There's quite a few high-profile players that have had those allegations against them. So that's something that's popped up. And the debate about athlete welfare when they are dealing with injuries or dealing with issues away from the field, and how their teams and sports that they play in look after them. But at the same time, domestic violence, I can have little sympathy for someone who gets involved in that kind of activity, beating your spouse. So we'll have to see what happens there. It's not the first time he's had allegations of domestic violence against him. Just the press doesn't. The press has gone mad for this, by the way. Not just in Australia, but over here as well. The press have gone mad for it because he was the golden star of English rugby league. Going over to the NRL so young, having such a positive impact on the NRL in the sense that he won a grand final within a few years of going over there. His stint in rugby union, and he's got that. It's made big news, but we'll have to wait and see what further information is released. Do I follow French rugby? I used to follow it more than I do now. I think French rugby is the highest paid rugby in the world. If you play in France, you're going to get paid more than if you play in England. And same with rugby league as well. The French rugby is the highest paying. So if you're a rugby player, you're going to get paid a good salary down there. The NRL, you can get paid more average salary, yes. I think it's the better quality league out of the Super League and the NRL. It's the better one. That's my personal opinion. I think it's a far more competitive league as well. More teams have appeared in the grand final than in the Super League. More teams have won in the NRL era than in comparable Super League eras. Only 4 winning teams in the Super League era. I think NRL has been 8 different teams have won, and I think is it 14 out of the 16 teams have appeared in grand finals. So there is an argument to say that the NRL is a more competitive league and a league that has a higher quality. But in my opinion, I honestly believe that. I think it gets more money on the TV deal. The players earn more. It wasn't always the case, but I do believe now that the players' average salaries are higher. I wouldn't say it's like the Premier League, but I think because rugby league has such a limited professional imprint, I haven't got a message yet, because the rugby league is not as widespread as rugby union when it comes to the amount of professional players. You've got a choice. You can go to the Super League structure or the NRL structure. That's really your professional choice. Should you be good enough to play professional level? There isn't really same depth, although there are talks of expanding the NRL with the Redcliffe Dolphins of Brisbane in the coming year or so, and they could bring in about $100 million worth of cash with them. So that is an interesting subplot, as there are talks ongoing to expand the NRL from 16 to 17, possibly 18 teams, and that is something that has to be waited to see. The NRL does not have a draft system. It's very similar to football in Europe, where you have the youth systems and youth clubs, junior clubs, and reserve grade and regional competitions that become feeder competitions to the NRL. And each club has a catchment area of clubs that it can select up and coming players from and assign players to if they're recovering from injuries, their reserve grade setup. But the interesting thing is the NRL salary cap is set up for a draft system, which it doesn't have. So there needs to be an adjustment to the salary cap system in a sense. The AFL has a slightly different system with a list system, but again, it does have catchment areas for clubs where they can have junior and reserve grade clubs playing in their system, and they get first pick on players coming through that system. But no, the NRL does not have a draft system like the North American sports. Although its salary cap is set up in that kind of regard where there's a loophole in the salary cap system where it is set up for a draft system, but it doesn't necessarily work out that way. But I honestly believe, looking at draft systems that we have in the NHL and the NFL and the NBA and Major League Rugby, it does reward failure. So you can tank to get the first overall pick or one of the highest draft picks out of a draft class, for example. So the draft system, in my eyes, does reward failure in a sense. But a salary cap system does, as I've seen it, and as I've said, does mean that the NRL is far more competitive than the Super League, and I think will continue to be so. That's my personal opinion from what I've seen, and the quality of rugby league that I've seen. Even teams that didn't make the final eight, there was some really good play in recent weeks. I mean, the Gold Coast Titans win 5 in a row. I wouldn't say Super League is boring. I think I will be watching the Challenge Cup games after I watch the NRL finals games tomorrow, and I'll be watching the double header, and I'll be watching the Challenge Cup final itself. I think the Super League is a slower pace of play, slightly different rules to the NRL. They haven't got the same rule sets, which I find bizarre in a sport that wants to grow its imprint on the world. Having a universal rule set, I think, should be something that rugby league as a sport should be considering. I wouldn't say Super League is boring. I would just say it's not as good quality. You can definitely see the difference in quality between the NRL and Super League, and that's why a lot of the best British and French players are now looking at the NRL to try and get contracts. And if there is this expansion coming with Redcliffe Dolphins, for example, and possibly an 18th team somewhere else in Australia or New Zealand, there is a concern there's a lack of first grade talent currently. But at the same time, if you want to expand, you're going to have players come from somewhere. And I think there is a growing trend of there's more English players or British players and some more French players looking at the NRL going, I might want to try my hand over there rather than stay in Super League. I can see that becoming more of a trend and it continuing. I don't think Super League can financially sustain what some of these players want. I mean, Bateman coming back to play in Super League is a little bit of a coup, but I don't think we're going to see as many good quality players going Super League's way as going the NRL's way. That's my personal opinion. Fans are not back at full capacity. I think we're at 50% at the moment. From watching the Penrith Roosters game, Panther Stadium was at about 50% capacity. There has been talks in raising capacities to 75% for the grand final. They're still in discussion phase, but I would think that we're looking at about 50% capacity at the moment. But again, that's subject to change as well. It depends on the virus rate. And Melbourne and the state of Victoria is basically in lockdown. The other states, the virus rate's negligible. Hence why they're having state of origin in Adelaide, game 1. And they did Perth last year as game 1 in state of origin. So the NRL is looking at these other areas possible for expansion. If you bring in Redcliffe, you're going to need an 18th team to make it an even league. And Adelaide and Perth are the 2 likely candidates to get a team, in my personal opinion. So the NRL is the Premier League and the Super League is League One. I don't think that's a fair comparison. They are both top grade competitions. I just think the NRL is more competitive and has more depth, I think, in player talent. But that wasn't always the case. I mean, rugby league in the UK was considered better at times, and there has been times where the top quality Australian players came over here instead. And that's likely it's to do with the amount of money in the sport. And in the 80s and the 90s, there was more money in English rugby league than in Australian rugby league. Um, those those tables have turned. What do I think about the Sam Burgess allegations? Well, I touched on them briefly, but I think they are quite serious. It does raise the question of player welfare. So obviously he's been playing with an injured shoulder for quite some time, hence why his early retirement, even though his contract I think till 2022 as a player. He obviously retired last year with 3 years left in his playing contract under medical retirement. There were rumours that he might come back and play. His marriage broke down last year, but there's been allegations of going back 3 or so years of domestic violence and drug misuse. So in that case, questions have to be asked of the NRL Integrity Unit, questions have to be asked of the anti-doping authorities, and questions have to be asked of the South Sydney Rabbitohs as well as of Sam Burgess. Questions do have to be asked about what's gone on there. And there are allegations that the Rabbitohs helped disguise positive tests. So that's something that has to be considered. At the moment, obviously, these are just allegations. The NRL are investigating, police are investigating. There's limited information available, but apparently the Australian, which is one of the major newspapers down under, has been doing investigative journalism for 4 months. And they're part of the Murdoch Group. And ironically, Sam Burgess was employed by Fox Sports as a pundit until he rejoined the Rabbitohs as a development coach. So beginning of the season during lockdown, he was employed by Fox Sports as a pundit and as a journalist, and he still does some of those duties as well. But a couple of months ago, he rejoined the the coaching bubble, and so he stood down from his roles concerning Fox and the Bunnies. We're going to have to see what happens. But if these allegations are proved to be true and they date back 3 years, I think he's going to be in a lot of trouble. A lot of trouble. And it's interesting, we haven't heard anything from any of his 3 brothers in regards to the allegations. It's going to be interesting to see what else comes out. But player welfare and the concerns about that, and if a player is going through all these injury concerns, that's got to be raised. But he's not the first player in the NRL to face these kind of allegations of drug misuse and domestic violence or field indiscretions. He won't be the last, but I think the allegations have to be taken with some seriousness. And if they are found to be true, that's going to rock the NRL. And if the allegations against the South Sydney Rabbitohs are found to be true, like they were covering up positive drugs tests or they were covering up and not being transparent with the process, then that in itself raises concerns about the integrity of the Rabbitohs organisation, and then is the issue far more widespread with recreational drug misuse. So we'll see. We'll see what happens, but we don't know yet. When do I see fans being 100% capacity? I think it depends on the country. I think Australia and New Zealand are a couple of steps ahead of the rest of us. I can't believe they're already planning 100% capacity at the Super Bowl, considering that Tennessee Titans players a couple of days ago, a lot of them tested positive. So I can't see that being feasible at this time. But we're looking at fans being back in stadiums at the end of March. So we've got 6 months to wait before fans are back in stadiums, in my personal opinion. If we're going by reports here, I think Australia and New Zealand are ahead of the curve a little bit. They're a step ahead. They've dealt with the various professional sports down under have dealt with the situation a lot better. They've had better communication with regional and national governments. They've had good dialogue. They've worked through plans of bubble restrictions, like talking about team bubbles and stuff, and curfews and health plans and regular testing, and they've compulsory flu shots and the whole shebang, really, to get it going again. And the NRL returned to play on the 28th of May. We're now on the 2nd of October. So the NRL, I think, has dealt with, as a league, I think it's the league which dealt with things the best. I think the AFL dealt with it pretty well as well. North America, I think the NHL decided going down the bubble city route, very similar to what the NRL and AFL started with when they resumed play at the end of May, beginning of June. I think the NHL were observing developments down under and seeing that they were proceeding far quicker than in Europe, and they really kept an eye on the situation. But I think 100% capacity, that's a long, long way away. I don't think we're going to get 100% capacity for quite some time. We'll have to wait and see what happens. Some leagues, like the Elite League here, have said we're going to indefinitely suspend the season. There's no plans to commence until at least January, February, and then go from there. Obviously, we've seen these rescue packages and emergency loans from government to sport, and that's something to keep an eye on. The RFL being the first league, I believe, league organisation to have discussions with government about emergency funding, which they got very, very quickly. Rugby unions announcing financial issues, the ECB and cricket, football has been in trouble, but fans back in stadiums, I think, is key for the long-term health and survival of sport. There's no other way about it, and the TV deals need to be seriously addressed, because I don't think all fans are happy with it just being on pay-per-view only or subscription only. I don't think fans are really happy with that. If we can't go to games, we want to be able to watch. There's a big drive for more free-to-air coverage, and some sports are suffering because they're solely behind a paywall. That's, again, another personal observation. Doesn't necessarily have to be the case, but TV deal structuring is something that needs to be looked at, and so accessibility. But fans being back in stadiums, I don't think we'll see 100% capacity for a long time to come. Do I think the Panthers will win the grand final, lose the likes of Parramatta and Melbourne? Well, here's the thing. That's only the first out of 4 games. There's more going. I mean, Parramatta and Melbourne have got to, play each other. That's got to happen yet. So one of them cannot win, by the way, the grand final. Parramatta and Melbourne. They've got to play tomorrow. The Raiders are playing. My team, the Raiders, are playing the Sharks. That's also taking place tomorrow. And the winner of that plays the Roosters, who lost today. And then you've got the Rabbitohs, who are going through this Sam Burgess crisis and scandal. They've got to play the Newcastle Knights on Sunday. So we're still getting through the first round of games. I think it's too early to tell, but they held on quite well against the Roosters, and they were 10-0 down. They raced into, I think, a 28-10 lead. Then the Roosters come back a bit, and then they get that field goal. I think, from where we're sitting now, the game I've just seen, I think it's too early to tell. I think the Panthers need to up their game a little bit. I don't think the Roosters are going to do it. Parramatta and Melbourne, if one of them lose, one of them gets a week off, the other team has to play the following week. So again, that's going to be interesting, and they have to play the winners of the Rabbitohs and the Knights. So that will make things very, very interesting as well, with the whole working out of things. So I'm not even sure if Parramatta or Melbourne will win it. I think it's a very, very, very open 2020 run into the grand final. Look, there's still 8 teams left in it as things stand. By the end of tomorrow, by the end of Sunday, there'll be 6 teams left in it. So I think any one of the 8 teams, in theory, can still win it. There's certain favourites like Melbourne, like the Roosters. Parramatta are one of the favourites because no team outside the top 4 has ever won an NRL grand final. Stress that. Although the Raiders, I think, are the team I think most capable outside the top 4 to win it. And I think, I hope we win. But that's something I've got to look forward to. If we lose against the Sharks tomorrow, we're out. So you've got to beat who's in front of you. But I think I don't know. I think it's a very, very open-ended question. I think if the Eels get through to the final again, and it's the Panthers Eels final, for example, then I would think the Penrith will win that one. But if Penrith, they have to play who's in front of them, pretty much, and they held on against the Roosters. I think there was a little lack of experience in finals football there in the first half, in the first 10, 15, 20 minutes. And there was a little bit of lack of experience in the second half at times to allow the Roosters back in, because they had the Roosters. They could have put 30, 40 points on that Roosters side. I don't think the Roosters do it. I don't think they go for a 3 in a row. Melbourne, we'll have to see what the Storm do. I think resting players last weekend, was that a mistake? Should they gone into the finals with confidence? Again, we'll wait and see. Same with the Raiders, but they've won their game rest, putting out their B side. I think it's going to be interesting, but we have to see what happens tomorrow in the 2 games tomorrow. Plain and simple. Looking at today's game, it's going to be a very, 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 really. I think the next 3 games are going to be really. There's going to be a lot of intensity. I think the Sam Burgess situation, will that distract the Bunnies? Will the ongoing speculation around Cameron Smith and Craig Bellamy distract the Storm? They've admitted that it distracted them last year. It's going to be interesting to see what's going to happen. But we've still got 3 games out of this weekend, and all 8 teams are still within a shout of winning. So we'll have to see what happens. But there's a lot of things in the history books that say Canberra can't do it because they're outside the top 4. The Roosters can't do it because they lost by more than 50 points. Cronulla have lost by 50 points. They're saying they can't do it. And they're the weakest team ever to come in with only 10 wins or something. There's a lot of history going against a lot of these sides when you look at the history books and historical form guide, but I think that goes out the window with the fact we had a shortened season and the new rules being brought in. And so we'll just have to see what happens. Do I think the Roosters are on the decline? They've shown some signs this season that they need to look at refreshing a few bits and pieces in their roster. There have been some signs that they are creaking a little bit in certain aspects of their game. There are some senior players there who are all in their 30s. We know Mitch Orbison's retiring, but there are some signs that maybe they have played a lot of matches, and that's catching up with them a little bit. That's a lot of intensity. That's a lot of extra games you've got to play as a player, and we've seen it with some of the best sides in sports that go into like a final series, like the NHL, like the NFL, NBA. Playing all these extra games do add up on a player, and sometimes you're going to have a down season. Now, they've still made finals. They're still in the finals. They have an opportunity to take on the winner of Canberra and Cronulla next week. If it's Canberra they're playing, I think they're done. If it's Cronulla they're playing, I think they're okay. But again, we've got to see how the games tomorrow play out. But I think the Roosters, I think they need to refresh that squad a bit. But those players are starting to look tired, and there's a lot of wear and tear and a lot of bodies in that squad. Missing Jake Friend, I think, was crucial. They're lacking depth at hooker. They've got some players who've had some injury concerns this season. When I say they're on the decline, they still make finals. But they've been saying about the Melbourne Storm for the last 4 or 5 years as well. They're on the decline and they keep making finals. So we'll have to see what happens with the Storm and the Roosters long term. But I think at some point these sides' dominance of the last decade or so is going to come to an end. And other teams like Penrith, like Canberra, are going to start making things a bit more interesting and making it a bit more competitive at the top end. If the Gold Coast Titans could have made playoffs if the league was playing all 24 weeks, there's no doubt that the Titans would have made the finals had it been a full-length season with the way they're playing. The way the Knights and Cronulla were playing, they were basically treading water above them. It would have been interesting had the NRL decided to just continue with a full-length season, even with the break, because, I do believe that the Titans would have easily caught Cronulla and the Knights and possibly even the Bunnies as well, the rate they were going and their consistency at the end of the season. But, they've just got to build on that momentum for next season. And Justin Holbrook is one of those coaches who's saying they should have a shorter off-season. So, it is what it is. But at the same time, that's in hindsight. The NRL and the Australian Rugby League Commission decided on a shorter season so they could get State of Origin in, so they could complete everything before November came along with it. Technically, that's the start of the next season because obviously players coming off contract, to get players back into training camp over the Christmas period and to get the next season started on time. I think they had to go with a shortened season. Obviously, as things have turned out, maybe they didn't need to do that, but that was the decision that the NRL made. They came to an agreement with state governments, Victoria and New South Wales. Obviously, the state of Victoria, the state of Queensland and New South Wales, the state of Victoria obviously has gone back into lockdown. New Zealand had to get the Warriors over, so they had to come to that decision anyway in order to get the sport back and going. The Broncos had a lots of issues behind the scenes. uh, yeah, they won the first two games, but they didn't adapt to the six again rule. They didn't adapt to the speed of play. They've only won one game since the resumption of play. And if the NRL said those first two games don't count, we're going from the resumption of play until round 20, they would have won one game post lockdown. So I can't see that. I think the Broncos have had a lot of long term problems that have been covered up by other teams not playing well. So last season they scraped into the top eight, lost the first game, got battered by Parramatta in a record-breaking finals defeat, and this season they've won three games. They deserve to be wooden spoons, and one game in 18 as a run. Yeah, that's something you just can't hide from the fact that they had the worst defence. They did deserve to finish bottom, and there can be no denying the fact that they were absolutely hopeless. And the fact they delayed announcing Kevin Walters as their new coach until after they played their final game tells you that they weren't acting decisively in repairing the problem. I don't think Justin Holbrook can turn the team around. Gold Coast. Yeah, I do believe so. The signings they've made and the changes to the tactics that they've used with the halves and some of the players that have been brought in and positional changes. Looking at how they played second half of the season, brilliant. You can't argue with that. They were one of the form teams going into the end of the season. It's a pity they couldn't win a few more games because I do believe they are a far better matchup in finals football than Cronulla and the Knights. Personally, I think they're playing better. I mean, they hammered the Newcastle Knights recently. They, I think they've beaten Cronulla as well. I think they beat teams above them. They beat the teams around them. And they beat the Broncos twice, which I think is something that they haven't done before in their history, twice in a season. And they've won three in a row against the Broncos. So they are, unfortunately, the season was only 20 rounds rather than the normal length. Had it been the normal length, yeah, I do believe they would have got into the finals. I think they do need regular finals football long term. And they do need to make a grand final within the next couple of years. Otherwise, all the hard work's been put in is for nothing. I think they do need to start making grand final appearances and having deep runs into the finals to really turn the fortunes of that team around, because otherwise they do risk being a mediocre side. You just have to look at the West Tigers. One grand final appearance, yes, they've won it, but they never got the wooden spoon, but they're always mediocre. The Dragons, one grand final appearance, win that, again, mediocre. No wooden spoons, but mediocre. The Gold Coast Titans, well, they have some wooden spoons. They've had some, like last season was just hopeless. They do risk turning into a Dragons or a West Tigers and just being mediocre around 10th. We've had the same argument about the New Zealand Warriors for a long time, that they're very mediocre, rarely make finals. And they had a good season as well, considering all their issues. And Todd Payton did a very good job turning the fortunes of that team around. But they again risk becoming a mediocre team unless they can regularly make finals football and then start building towards a grand final, which I believe they can do. It's doable. It's very, very feasible and doable. They're starting to build the right culture there and the right kind of spine to the team. So it is feasible that they can do it, but they need to be consistent in getting away from the bottom end of the table and consistently making the top eight in the next five or so years. Otherwise, the long term future of the Gold Coast Titans is a question mark, and there's been that question mark over the long term future of the team for quite some time because of their lack of success. Do I like the NFL? I used to watch the NFL quite a lot growing up. I watched, I think, 16 Super Bowls in a row. But as time has gone on, I've slowly lost interest, and I'll watch the occasional game, but I am slowly losing interest in the NFL. There's a few sports that I'm starting to lose interest in and watch less. The NFL is one of them. It's definitely a league and a sport that needs to look at some of the issues that are facing it. And right now, the biggest issue, obviously, is the coronavirus and the fact that players are testing positive. So, if more players start testing positive, can a full season be played? That's something to be looked at. I think the way the NFL dealt with the Colin Kaepernick protests ongoing, I think, has sent very mixed messages. I think the NFL needs to look at itself and need to assess where it's at. There's a lot of things that the NFL could do better. Player welfare is up there with the CTE lawsuit. That's very badly damaged the brand of the NFL. There are issues within the sport. There's a lot of issues within the sport. There's a lot of scandal within the NFL. There's always individual players doing things they shouldn't, and allegations surfacing of quite bad off-field behaviour that does tarnish the reputation. The CTE lawsuit has done some damage to the NFL brand, and that's concerning, player welfare, and that's been an ongoing issue for over a decade. And they settled out of court, so it basically tells you that they were going to face a bigger lawsuit payout than if they'd settled in court. I used to be a bit of a Green Bay fan, but I don't really follow a team now, really, in all honesty. I mean, we have to ask the question, for example, does the International Player Pathway Program, is that just for PR, or is that an actual legitimate program where Christian Wade, for example, can break into the Buffalo Bills within the next couple of seasons? Valentine Holmes and Jared Hayne have both tried from the NRL. Jordan Malatia, former South Sydney Rabbitoh, I mean, he's gone over and been drafted. If the International Player Pathway Program is to work, these players have got to stick around long term. But it also shows that they're obviously trying to attract even more players and more quality into the system. Is that an indictment of the collegiate system, or is that a fear of rugby league and rugby union taking potential players away from them? That's something I think needs to be looked at, because they're trying to poach rugby players. But then you look at Major League Rugby and you look at the US and Canadian programs at national level, and look at the amount of ex-American football players that have actually been converted to rugby players. And there's a higher proportion of things happening in rugby where they're converting American football players into rugby players than the other way around. So it'd be interesting to see how long the international player pathway continues as an NFL objective, so to speak. Is it more a PR stunt, or is it an actual legitimate, let's get rugby players from both codes, let's try and switch them? Because out of it, only one player's been drafted. 3 players of high profile have gone over. 2 of them Australian, 1 English. And the only one I think to stick it out is Christian Wade. I think he's the only one, really, I think, to keep giving it a go. And that's partly due down to the RFU and England not selecting him. He's still the top try scorer in Premiership history. I'm surprised he decided to turn his back on rugby union, but I think he could see the writing on the wall. He felt he was underappreciated, not given him a shout at international level. For whatever reason, he's decided to go down. And I think the Buffalo Bills are serious on converting him to American football. But if it's more just for PR, then it's not really going to work, because if kids aren't going to see a hope in hell of if they are playing rugby league or rugby union, they want to give it a go, and it's not really producing, then it's a flawed program and it's a waste of money, pretty much. I think we have to believe it is going to work, but at the same time, if it's just purely just for PR, then I think it's the wrong way to go about it. Is American football is growing slowly in the UK, that the NFL Europe failed for a reason. Okay, it failed for a reason. There's a reason why, as on a continent-wide basis, and I'm including Britain in this, ice hockey is the second most popular sport played in Europe. There's a reason why basketball was more popular. There's a reason why, obviously, football, rugby league and rugby union are more popular. There's a lot of state funding. If you go to Eastern Europe, Romania, rugby union is a very well played sport. Georgia, it's become the national sport in the Caucasus. Basketball is very popular in the Balkans and across Central Europe. I think it's an interesting one. I think they've oversold the London series now. I think that's lost a lot of its sparkle. Obviously, there's been a lot of ongoing talk for a long, long time about having a team in London, and I've done videos on that. And what we've seen is that, guess what? There is no team in London. The attempts to buy Wembley Stadium from Sahid Khan were shambolic. Uh, in reality, and the FA really shot themselves in the foot, and I think damaged their brand. And the negativity, and people go, why are you being so negative about it? Well, it's because British taxpayer money funded that stadium, so we deserve some money back. And the fact that they were selling it for half price, pretty much, boggled belief. It was a really poor attempt to try and get fans on side. I would say it's a conflict of interest because the Khan family owns Fulham. Then suddenly Spurs have their new stadium built to host NFL games, and the NFL's not playing here this season. So I think I think the London series is starting to wear thin. I've got bored of it now. I think I think there's too much over theatricals. You know, to do with. I mean, it's the same with Major League Baseball last year as well. They had an opportunity in 2017 to bring games here. They decided to come over here when the Cricket World Cup was on at the same time, so they couldn't use a cricket ground like the Oval or Lords, which would have been far more appropriate to use for baseball. And they decided to go with basically a football stadium that also hosts athletics, and it was a really shit spectacle. But there we go. But looking at it, I mean, I did a video on this a couple of years ago, looking at when will London ever get an NFL team, and the plan was to already have a team here by now. So yeah, and you have to listen to all the interviews given by other major league sports about having a team or teams over here in Europe, and the response is no. We'll still take pre-season and regular season games over here, but we're not going to put a team here because that's a long-term investment where you've got to play 50% of your games at home. And if you're already a minimum of 5 hours ahead of the eastern seaboard and you're 8 hours ahead of the western seaboard, you're going to have to play games in the middle of the night for prime TV viewing in the US, and that's just something that's just logistically not possible. So logistically not possible. And then you've got differences where you've got to pay the players' wages, convert them from US dollars to pounds. Then you have to take into consideration property prices and the tax system. And yeah, can you imagine? Look, American ignorance and arrogance go hand in hand. They all assume we live in London. They all assume we talk like Mary Poppins, and they get really confused when you mention cities like Manchester and Birmingham and Glasgow and Edinburgh and Bristol and Southampton and Reading and Portsmouth, and they get really confused because they think everyone lives in London. That's my personal opinion. There is a bit of arrogance and ignorance. I don't think they quite appreciate the fact that we already have quite well established team sports that have historical foundations in the communities that they're played. Hence the argument about football and Macclesfield going out of business, Bury going bust, issues with football clubs and rugby clubs struggling and rugby league struggling and all that. They expect us to change our start times of our sports to suit the US market. So change of kickoff times in football and rugby league and rugby union over here to suit the US market. But we can't demand time changes for the US market to suit us. There is that. I think fans don't like that, and we've been very vocal about that. I think, yeah, there's a bit of ignorance and quite a bit of arrogance as well. The amount of Americans who've never actually watched a rugby league or rugby union match is astounding. They're really surprised that we have all the metal pads on and we aren't giving each other brain damage every 6 seconds and then stopping for 5 minutes to set up the next play because it's a constantly flowing game. Although it is starting to gain traction over there, both codes, which is positive. They assume that because we play, like let's say ice hockey at a slightly lower level, that we can't play it and we don't support it, which again is a load of horseshit. I've seen that comment as well. The opportunity the NFL had has passed. Yes, I will admit that. And when the NBA came over, I think was it last season or the season before, the Boston Celtics were technically playing a home and home. I forget who they were playing. I think it was the Timberwolves, I think, but they were playing over here. And their chief operations officer was interviewed by I think was it Sky Sports or BBC Sport. They anyway, British News interviewed him on the possibility of having a major league North American franchise in Europe. Okay, not just London, Europe. And the Boston Celtics CEO was like, "It's never going to happen economically." That window passed over a decade ago. So the NFL have missed the boat. Yet they're still pushing the Jaguars on us, and the Jaguars, oh shit, they are. And the way their players acted a couple of years ago when they refused to play, a £60,000 bar tab, it shows the arrogance of Americans. Toronto Wolfpack or the Ottawa team playing. I don't know why the RFL is proceeding with the Ottawa expansion, considering they had to seek an emergency loan from the UK government just to sustain themselves during the lockdown. Let's put that out there. Secondly, Toronto, they've already said that they plan to, but they couldn't resume play this season. That's not positive signs. So I don't know. I think Toronto and Ottawa, I think that would be madness for the RFL to proceed down this line without looking at what's going on domestically first. There have been calls to expand in the south of England, which are not going away, in order to be classed as a national sport that can get national recognition and a better TV deal. I think one of the members of the board said we do risk looking like a Victorian institution that's outdated, because it's not the 1950s, it's the 2020s now. We need to move with the times, and we need to invest in the south, make sure the Broncos and the Scholars have other teams around them to build the player base. Otherwise, we are limiting ourselves in our player base and our fan base, which can only limit the amount of tickets sold, merchandise sold, and the reach of the game. I personally can't see Ottawa and Toronto working out with the travel restrictions we currently have in place. Let's make that kind of clear here. If Toronto was struggling before the lockdown in recruiting players and the visa situation, that just tells you all you need to know about how stupid the idea of growing in Canada rather than in the UK actually is. But this is the RFL we're talking about. This is the old boys club that is obsessed with the M62 corridor and nothing else. They were very resistant to Toulouse and Catalan coming along. And the media releases, they try and turn the M62 corridor against everyone else. They are obsessed with the M62 corridor. It does nothing for the sport. They need to look outside Yorkshire and Lancashire and Cheshire and actually go, oh, Christ, there is fans of rugby league in other parts of the UK. Let's try and grow the sport in other parts of the UK. It's now a summer sport, remember? So it won't clash with rugby union as much. So, there are plenty of rugby clubs that basically are not being used over summer that could use the income. Let's work this out. But the RFL and the RFU like fighting each other over things. So it is what it is. It's the RFL. Whatever they do doesn't surprise me with how stupid it is. I can't see Ottawa and the Wolfpack really being a long-term success. I think it can be a very expensive money pit, much like the ECB. I mean, look at our sports governance. The ECB, we're making a loss between 380 and 100 million, 308 million, but we're going to continue with the 100 format, even though it's going to make a loss in the first 2 years. Whoever came up with that brainchild deserves to be sacked. The ECB is losing money. They're forging ahead with a concept that no one wants, that is losing money. Let that sink in about how badly inept the ECB is, and you have to ask the question, where the fuck is all the TV money gone? And I keep asking that question, and the ECB, I've even mentioned it on Twitter, and they blocked me. Same with Dan Rowan, the BBC reporter. He's blocked me because I highlighted some of the shit that he's reported on and some of his antics over the last decade, how he's still a reporter, so he blocked me. Yeah. So I'm having my battles with the RFL, the RFU, and the British media on Twitter. It's fun. I got blocked by Dan Rowan because he's a shit. Anyway, I might do a video on that actually. That Dan Rowan has blocked me on Twitter and how I don't care, because I find his journalism cheap, nasty, and quite vile, to be honest. He must have obviously seen my video that I did on him on YouTube a couple of years ago after the Leicester City helicopter crash and how I think he's an absolutely vile human being. But there we go. it is what it is. Oh, look, Spain Rugby League against North Wales. I mean, look, Rugby League in Wales has again had a battle with the Welsh Rugby Union. They try and kill each other. I mean, Welsh rugby's in a mess anyway. Professional sports in Wales, there's not a lot of money in the regional areas outside of Cardiff and Swansea and Newport and Wrexham at a push with the football club where, Ryan Reynolds is now interested in buying Wrexham Football Club. But professional sports in Wales does have an issue. There is, well, they tried it in rugby union with the Celtic Crusaders. That lasted a season. The 4 provinces now can't afford to pay their players. The rugby league the Welsh Rugby Union tries to kill it at every attempt because they realise it's probably a better code. The funding matrix is a shambles. Sport in Wales is not very sustainable. Let's be quite brutally honest. Again, it's sustainability and whether there's an interest in Southern Ireland, for example, in the Republic for ice hockey. That's again a question that needs to be asked: is there actually a fan base for ice hockey in Southern Ireland? And I would say no. I think the Gaelic amateur sports, the Gaelic amateur association sports, such as Gaelic football and hurling, are more popular, but they are insisting that they remain amateur. So there are starting to be slow, debate about turning the Gaelic sports professional. But I think again you would have to ask why Cardiff is the only, the Cardiff Devils the only fully professional hockey team in Wales. Why Swansea and Newport don't have rinks. There's a lot of questions need to be asked about why there's only one fully professional team in Wales and one semi-pro team in Wales. That is questions that the British Ice Hockey Association, the Elite League, the National League, and all that, they have to come together and go, why we only got one professional team and one semi-pro team. That's what you've got to ask. Why there's only 2 hockey clubs in Wales? Again, I'd love to know your thoughts on my fans come back into sporting venues. Look, I've already done videos on it. Mike, my concern is that more than just football will suffer. As an ice hockey fan, I can't go watch any of my local teams play. I can't go watch Basingstoke play. I can't watch Bracknell or Slough. I can't watch Guildford. The Elite League has said, this is the Ice Hockey League, saying there's no play indefinitely this season. National League, I've got mates who play amateur level. My mate Dave, my mate Dan, they've had guidance issued by English Ice Hockey Association about their rights to play and train. I mean, my mate Dave's made it, the amateur season's been cancelled. So, it's not just football that's suffering. I think one of the reasons why football's suffering is the chronic financial mismanagement of football over a very long period of time. And that's throughout the leagues. If the great Barcelona are in financial difficulty, just imagine what's going on with teams at a lower level. Valencia's up, the Swanee as well. It's not just English football that's in trouble. It's across the board. As a long-term future, the National League has had an emergency funding granted to it. There's still ongoing discussions between the Premier League and the EFL about a funding matrix. But we have to look at the TV rights first up and how much they're worth and who gets what. That's something the TV rights formula is wrong. At the same time, the financial mismanagement and the weak governance over a significant period of time, and we're going back pre-90, I think about 1990 to 92 period when the Premier League was set up and the EFL had a breakdown in trust with clubs. This is not a new thing. This doesn't happen overnight. This has been going on for 3 decades of a lack of trust between clubs in the Football League and the FA. The Premier League comes along, and there's still a lack of trust because you look at what happened at the beginning of lockdown, Mike, with the PFA, the Players Professional Footballers Association, should I say, saying do not take wage cuts or wage deferrals. And clubs like Tottenham, and I use Tottenham as an example, going, we're going to furlough our non-playing staff, but guess what? We're going to pay Gareth Bale 300 grand a week. Real Madrid going to pay the rest of that. Where's the justification? So there is an issue about player wages. They're going to have to get paid less long term. It doesn't matter if about lower league and national league clubs. This is the whole lot. Football has been its own worst enemy, and now when people were saying the financial bubble was going to burst, this is it bursting. It's going to get messy. We could see more than just Macclesfield go out of business and Bury go out of business. Southend and the next club facing a winding up petition. How are the lower league clubs going to survive? Who knows? The FA is doing a really great job helping with the funding matrix. So it's down to the Premier League and the EFL to come up with discussions. The government are doing nothing, it seems. Yeah, we could see more than 50 or 60 clubs go out of business. The professional leagues, at least, we could see a hell of a lot more. And part of that is due to the reckless overspend and the weak governance for a long period of time. And the players refusing to take pay cuts on a permanent basis. They still want to get paid more money. I've worked out, and I start my new job Monday, but I've worked out if I'd stayed at my old job, it would take me 30 years before taxes to earn what Gareth Bale earns in a week in my lifetime. 30 years on working on the wage that I was on to earn what Gareth Bale earns in a week. Let that sink in. Just let that sink in. And then you have to look at yourselves and go, how much am I earning in my job, or how much do I get out of student loans or whatever? Work out how much you're earning a year, what your average salary is, and then go, is that justifiable? And my answer would be no. Just no. That is obscene. And then I compare what he's earning a week with what the average NRL player earns in a year. Now, rugby league, that is. Yeah, he still earns more money in a week than the average rugby player in rugby league or rugby union earns in a year at the top of them. So this is where football's gone horribly wrong. Second to that, when fans are allowed back in, which looks like to be March at the earliest, although we have to see what happens over the coming weeks. But we'll go with March, about Easter at the earliest. How many clubs would have gone out of business by then? And what will the ticket price be when we're allowed back into stadiums? Because if Manchester United are saying they're losing £5 million a day and they are the biggest stadium in the Premier League, let's not forget that. They have the biggest stadium, right? And if the Premier League are claiming they're losing £100 million a week, take that into consideration. How much is our ticket price going to be when we are allowed back into stadiums? Just think on that as well. Yeah, there's my thoughts on it. I think it's not just this month, it's when we are allowed back in, what's the ticket price going to be? Is that going to be a sustainable price? Right? A sustainable price. And how can these players justify their wage packets when we fans were losing our jobs? We have no money to spend, facing homelessness, right? And they're earning 40 grand a week average, or 50 grand a week average, or whatever you want to work out the average matrix by. Because now that Bale's coming to the Premier League, the average will have to adjust. How can the clubs justify? The clubs have got to hardball these players. The player power has got to the point where clubs are now overspending, and it is what it is. I think. Oh yeah, look, again, talking about the future of teams. Ice hockey's in a mess. Rugby league, I think, will be protected somewhat because their season's nearly ended now, and it's a summer league, so if fans are allowed back in the summer, that will cushion them a little bit. But they had to seek an emergency loan from the government. Rugby union's crisis. Cricket, where's all that money gone? And the question has to be asked of these sports is like, you've taken a lot of TV money. Where's all the money gone? Where's all the money gone? And it's been more than a decade of failure. Some sports have been badly run for a lot longer than that. Other sports just haven't got the exposure I think they deserve. Some sports have decided to go fully behind a paywall, and I think that's harmed them. You look at motorsport in general. I think British touring cars, I think, is the only motorsport that's free to wear in this country. The World Rally Championship, paywall. F1, Oh, it can fuck off, but paywall. Superbikes, MotoGP, the motocross. God, I could so many things that used to be on free to air coverage have just hidden behind a paywall now, and they wonder why the sport is less popular. Cricket. Cricket's in its own mess of its own making. Chased the Murdoch money and is now panicking because it's making all these losses because people just do not want to pay for BT and Sky Sports. Plain and simple. Is what it is. Oh, look, you have to ask the question, where's all the money gone? We've had the same debate. I mean, I'm a massive NRL fan. I'm not going to hide my bias towards that particular league, but the same question was asked about where's the TV money gone, a multi-billion-dollar deal. And the Players' Retirement Fund was raided by the NRL to cover some of their losses. And the question was asked, where's all the money gone? Plain and simple. It led to the CEO losing his job and governance changes, but the question was asked, where's all the money gone? So even in better run sports, you've got to ask the question, where's the money gone? And this is just a question that's been asked over and over again about the reckless spending and the poor governance. And these questions aren't going away, and these sports have no answers for it. And yeah, reckless spending right up until March, pretty much. These sports were recklessly spending money right up until the day the tap was turned off. And what we're seeing now is the aftermath of chronic mismanagement, because there's been a poor lack of governance throughout the process, from football, rugby union, rugby league not so much because it doesn't really have the money to recklessly spend. But again, the fact they've had to go to the government and go, please give us money, shows how badly biased the TV. I mean, they get so little money out of the TV deal. It's ridiculous. Ridiculous. They're not given enough exposure nationally. It's ridiculous. Not all the Challenge Cup games are shown on the FA Cup on free to air TV. It's ridiculous. But again, that's partly to do with the RFL not really wanting to expand in the south of England. Just put it out there. It's so obvious where they need to go to get investment and corporate sponsorship and grow the game, and they want to go to Canada. And you're left scratching your head, going, "Well, it hasn't worked." Just stupid. My thoughts on Speedway. I do like watching a bit of Speedway, but again, it's on pay for subscription only TV. So again, limited audience you can get for it. It's again shambolic. But yeah, the fact that they didn't stop spending when the lockdown came in really just shows how out of touch the players are, how out of touch the sports actually are with their fan bases, because we were always told ticket prices would stay low. Mega TV deals, ticket prices keep going up. It's becoming football, for example, is becoming a rich man's sport. There's clearly a disconnect between the fans and the clubs. And there's got to become a point where some of these players have to look at themselves and going, do we really deserve this much money? And the debate about a salary cap is not going away. But yeah, there was a clear lack of management at the top level, lack of correct investment in the correct areas. A lot of things like things like the ECB and the FA is cash poor but asset rich. The ECB's broke because it's got no assets. Rugby league is broke because it's got no assets. Rugby union, very asset rich. The value of Twickenham alone, Jesus Christ, just get sponsorship rights for that. Insane. But rugby union's going down the same way as football. Really selling the soul of the game off to people like CBC. It's not gone down well with fans. Fans are saying, keep your hands off. We don't want investment people, We don't want these loan sharks involved. But again, I think we are reaching a crossroads. And I will say this, the sports will survive. They'll still be played. But how many clubs go out of business and then how many new clubs pop up in the aftermath to replace the clubs that have gone out of business. I think that's what we've got to look at, is the sports will survive, some clubs won't. And it comes down to the reckless financial management and poor governance over a lengthy period of time. So not forget that. Weak governance over a long period of time and no financial oversight. No one's saying there has to be a spending cap. There are rules. I mean, the financial fair play rules we know are completely and utterly a waste of time. UEFA have admitted as such that they are a waste of time. You know, and UEFA are coming up with this new European competition that no one really wants. A third tier. It's just like, bring back the Cup Winners' Cup. That's what fans want, but sports governance go, fans, no. We want the money. We want money. No. So there is clearly a breakdown in respect to fans, the governing bodies, certain sports, clubs, players, the whole thing. I think what has been highlighted is real poor governance and management, and it's been exposed so publicly that these sports have been so badly run for so long, and they've not. And now people are holding them to account and asking the questions. But no, football seems to have carried, top level football seems to have carried on regardless of the situation. We're still seeing big transfers of players in the between 20 and 60, 70 million pound transfers. I'm thinking, how is that justifiable? When a few months ago you're laying off staff and furlough them, saying you can't afford to pay them, but you can afford to pay out 70 million on a player. This is where football's just really just got it wrong. So misread the room. So when we are allowed back in, how many fans are actually going to want to go back to their local football club and support them in the top flight? And how many clubs will we have left to support? For those who are on the governing body of any sports run one club, they will run it. Yeah, it's probably about right. What has come, obviously, what's been exposed is they're just the reckless spending, and then you look at the governance side of things, and it's just lack of transparency. Clearly, not taking fan consideration and fan feedback into account, because I can tell you now, looking at social media, there is a backlash against sports, and I will say this: if the lower leagues do start going bust, Premier League can't sustain itself. You do need a lower league structure for players to develop, players to get match experience, coaches to get experience. You need lower levels to sustain the sport, player development, and coach development as well. Sometimes new clubs getting into the Premier League, freshen it up. You got to have these kind of things. Without the lower league clubs, football cannot sustain itself. Plain and simple. It's a simple fact. Without the lower league clubs in English football, it's not sustainable. It's the same in rugby union, same in rugby league. You start taking those little bricks and pieces and bricks out of the structure will collapse. I use the analogy of a building. You start taking supports away before a building is fully constructed, or when a building's standing, you start taking a few bricks out, it's going to start wobbling. You start taking whole levels out, it will collapse. There's too much weight at the top. The imbalance is such that it's not sustainable. And the way the TV deal was being designed is wrong. The TV deal was still on the 50, 25, 12.5 format, percentage-wise, which it used to be. Clubs wouldn't be going bust. Because now it's on, I think it's on an 80% to the Premier League, 15% to the Championship, and then the rest goes to League One and League Two. That's why clubs are going bust. The old TV percentages, I think, was 50% went to the top flight, 25% the second tier, and 12.5% was split equally between League One and League Two. Well, the old Division 3, the old Division 4. That's no longer the case since the Premier League. So the TV deals are very imbalanced, and you look at the amount of clubs that are going out and struggling with administration and points deductions and winding up orders. They're all mostly, predominantly, although we've had Portsmouth being an example in the Premier League, Wigan being another one that's a recent Premier League relegation story with money issues. But you look at it, they're all in Championship to League Two, all the financial issues, and you look at the TV deal and how it's sorted out. There you go. It's the greed at the top is killing the bottom. But then the reckless overspending at the bottom to get to the top where you can be greedy is it's just a revolving cycle. So when a club gets relegated from the Premier League, it can do a Leeds, it can do a Blackburn, it can do a Bolton, it can do a Wigan, it can an Oldham, a Swindon Town, just tumble through the leagues and struggle. Simple. So it's a revolving cycle, and yeah, there's too much money at the top, not enough at the bottom. Players are paid too much. Clubs ripping off their fans. These clubs can't keep their best players, so they can't develop a good core squad and work their way up the divisions. So they have to then spend to replace. And yeah, it is literally the greed's at the top. The greed is at the top, and it's unsustainable. And it was unsustainable before the coronavirus. It will remain unsustainable post coronavirus. But there seems to be no willingness at the FA, the Premier League, and the EFL to change the situation. Clubs are not happy with the EFL's TV deal that they've struck. Very unhappy. And again, the weight is too at the top, so it's unbalanced, and the clubs at the bottom are dying. And it's not for lack of fans. No, it's not for lack of fans. It's because of greed. The fans are the ones paying the price, and they're often players who are going to be out of work. And a lot of these players didn't do so well at schools. They don't have a lot of transferable skills, a lot of these lads. They're going to be on the scrap heap in their mid-20s. So for all the jokes that you can have in the comment section about Swindon Town, doesn't matter. Does not matter a jot. If the way the league is structured financially is to continue like this, you might as well kill football now. Kill it. And the same can be said about rugby union, and the same can be said about rugby league, and the same can be said, with other like forms of motorsport, anything. Oh, look, overpaying players, well-paid players, bit of tongue tiner, is not a bad thing. It's overpaying average players is the bad thing. There's a lot of average players earning money they shouldn't earn, and other players just their wages are unjustifiable. What they're earning a week, they should earn a year. Plain and simple. Football wages are massively, massively inflated. In my 30 years of life, the average salary has gone up from 70 grand a year, which even back in 1989, 1990, wow, you know, that's big money, to 70 grand a week. A yearly wage has become a weekly wage. So its wages are 52 times bigger now than what they were 30. I mean, that's just how much wage inflation is there. That in itself is not sustainable. The fact that a yearly wage has become a weekly wage. That is wrong on so many levels. But the players don't want to I mean, the PFA, their trade union body, has told these players do not accept wage deferrals or wage cuts. Refuse them. Individual clubs and individual playing squads came together and came to agreements, Birmingham City being the prime example that led the way in English football. That's irrelevant. When your trade union is saying keep getting paid, refuse offers on the table, when the industry you work in is on its knees, shows you where the greed's at. No, there is no way that it can continue as it is, because Macclesfield and Bury are just the beginning. We are going to see more clubs hit the skids very, very quickly. And unless fans are allowed back into stadiums at some point sooner than the end of March, kiss goodbye to football, and I would say rugby union as well. Absolutely. You can just kiss goodbye to a lot of lower league sport, be it semi-pro or professional. Just kiss goodbye to it, because the players at the top don't want to take pay cuts. And they're saying that they're doing all these charity things, and just no. I don't buy a lot of their tick. They're more interested in their TikTok accounts and their Twitter feeds and their social media than actually getting out in the real world. These guys live in a bubble. They live in a bubble from the age of 11 when they're basically scouted by the youth academies, spoon fed for their entire lives, paid stupid money, and there you go. And League One and League Two have basically said we need a salary cap. There's already plans to divide it into North and South, like League One and League Two North, and League One and League Two South. Bring in the National League and split that from the National League North and South all the way, and restructure it. That was a plan that was put on the table. They put on the table salary cap idea. And all the clubs in League One and League Two, apart from I think a handful, voted in favour of salary cap. What else can I say? There is growing momentum from the bottom end to be more not conservative. What's the term? Realistic in their finances and a bit more restrained in their finances. And go, there's a realism and things aren't, you know. When you've got like professional leagues saying we need spending controls, we need to rein in the spending and be more realistic in the wages we pay players. Because even in League One and League Two, they're getting paid more a week than I'll earn in 3 months. Some of these guys, they're still on good money. League Two, some of the League Two clubs, okay, yeah, they're earning what I would take 2 weeks to earn. They're still on double what I'm earning. They're still on 40, 45, 50 grand a year. That's a more realistic wage. Even that is not sustainable. And yes, I understand sports careers are sometimes very, very short at the professional level. I understand that. But the rate they're getting paid at the top really is just not sustainable at all. Not sustainable at all. And if there is going to be a split, it's going to be catastrophic because there's going to be a complete breakdown in trust between the players, the clubs, and the Football League, the FA, the Premier League, which we've already seen with what the PFA said, be at the height of lockdown, saying don't take wage cuts or wage deferrals. So I don't know where you go from there in that aspect. We've got players testing positive. We've got coaches testing positive. Fans not allowed in stadiums. Lack of guidance from the government. The whole thing's a mess. But this has exposed a lot of the issues that professional sports had for a very, very long time. It's not just football. Let's be clear on that. It's not just football. I think a lot of the players end up doing it anyway, regardless of what the union told them. Look at Birmingham City. That's a prime example of a club and a playing group. That's it straight away. Ignored what the PFA was saying. Came around the table and said, look, we'll take 50% to survive. All done amicably. Not a single player refused. The club said, this is the options we have. The players came back and said, we're willing to do this. The club said, yeah, let's do it. So, it did show that it was doable. So to come to an arrangement without the PFA and the clubs and the FA and the Premier League and the EFL talks all breaking down, individual clubs and playing groups were like, well, we do have a conscience. And Birmingham City, the players realised that the non-playing staff were going to lose their jobs. So they stepped up and said, yeah, we're willing to take pay cuts in order to protect those who basically get us on the pitch every week. The support staff, the club staff. And yes, some players did go against what the union were suggesting, and some clubs, didn't go with what the EFL and the Premier League were suggesting with the talks. And they went, sod you guys, we're going to come and have our own mediation, meet in the middle, and without you guys getting involved. Birmingham City proved you could do that. That shamed a lot of clubs, to be fair. A lot of clubs were shamed into acting, but then not all the clubs did, and then other clubs were still furloughing non-playing staff. And Tottenham and Liverpool really felt the backlash. Newcastle got some backlash as well. But Tottenham, how they can then justify some of their signings, I don't know. These are clubs that furloughed non-playing staff. The backlash they received was so visceral, they very, very quickly unfurloughed them. But, and then they said, oh, now, we are taking pay cuts. If that is the case, how can they still justify some of the signings they've made? Gareth Bale, Thiago, how can they justify these signings? That's where I'm coming from. This is where I thought there'd be more emphasis on the youth systems and club systems to promote from within, and they're still going out to market. And I think I'm scratching my head, going, there is no justification for that. None. Absolutely no justification whatsoever. When these are people saying we've got to furlough non-playing staff. This is one of the reasons why I'm falling out of love with the sport. How socially unaware the sport seems to be. How in a bubble these people live. You know, it's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous how out of touch the sport on the general point is. When these clubs that were furloughing non-playing staff are going out and signing players for big money, that's just sick. Their players not taking pay cuts, that is just completely unacceptable. And then you've got particular players within those playing groups trying to, do take the moral high ground with their PR offensive, where we're raising money for the NHS and we refuse to take pay cuts because it will harm the NHS. Bullshit. A lot of these football players, I'll use Ronaldo and Messi, right? Everyone seems to fall over at the feet of these guys. These guys have been convicted of tax evasion in court. So let's not pretend these guys are all lovey-dovey when it comes to their charitable donations. These guys evade, which is a crime, paying tax. A lot of them are doing it. Let's stop pretending we're all naive and go, oh, look at Marcus Rashford, he's lovely. I appreciate what Marcus Rashford has done. And I'm not saying he is avoiding tax or evading tax, but a lot of his contemporaries are. And they're not willing to take pay cuts. So can someone please explain that to me? It's frustrating. Really pissed off. It just is. And when you players like Danny Rose kicking off because 50 grand a week's not enough to live on, what planet are these people living on? Seriously, Danny Rose, he keeps giving me like material. Oh, it's just hilarious. And while I don't disagree with someone going, well, my colleague's getting paid twice as much as me for the same job and wanting a pay increase, that's perfectly fine. But his excuse was 50 grand a week is not enough to live on, which is obscene. What do you spend your money on? Not that I can actually, right? So Tottenham go, no, we're not paying you your salary increase. You go to Newcastle on loan. Then they sign Gareth Bale for 6 times as much per week, but they can't justify giving him an extra. I don't get this. Not that Danny Rose is very good as a footballer. He seems to complain more than he actually plays. He seems to hate his job that much. I don't know why he does it, but he's kicking off about 50 grand a week. I can tell you now, this time last year, where I was working, we were going to go on strike over not being paid enough. When I say not being paid enough, we were being paid less than £9 an hour to do the job that we were doing. Even now, my ex-colleagues are still getting paid under £10 an hour for what we're doing. So these football players need to get out in the real world, because I'll tell you now, they wouldn't last a week doing what work I've been doing for the last 5 years. They wouldn't last a week. They wouldn't last a day. They're too entitled. They're too much of a prima donna. Too entitled. They don't live in the real world. It's ridiculous. And not all players like this, but there are some examples, and I will use them, of the Gareth Bale salary. That's just unjustifiable for a player who spent most of the last 18 months playing golf and doing nothing constructive. Oh, if Danny Rose could actually play football, he would be worth a pay rise. Yeah, he's better than me playing football, but Jesus Christ, he's not an elite level football player. No offence to him. And no one's worth 50 grand a week. Christ. To earn that, I'd have to work for 2.5 years to earn the amount of money he earns a week before tax. That's before tax. After tax, no, I don't get that much. After tax, what the salary I was on was 17,800 quid a year. Yeah. So it would take me 2.5 years to earn what he earns in a week, and he's complaining that it's not enough to live on. I really fear that if for some of these young lads who want to play, and now obviously the women's game's become professional as well, I really do fear about what's going to happen to them and what they perceive to be the sport they're going to go into full-time, senior players. I do, and people wonder why they misbehave with the Foden and Greenwood antics at the last international break. It's because they are in this position where they don't live in the real world, they are entitled, and they're getting paid big money from a very young age. And then when they misbehave and they're castigated over goals, rightly so, because they're representing and meant to be role models for the community. They wonder why they get the negative press, but then the press doesn't help either. The actual mainstream media is pretty toxic, and I'm not a big fan of the mainstream media either. But with high salaries, there's just behave yourself. It's not hard. Just behave yourselves, please. It's not hard. So I do fear for some of these players, young players who are in like their teenage years, about to break into the first team squad, be 18, 19. Living in that bubble, yeah, you don't really get to see the wider world. And a lot of them have been in the youth systems of these clubs since the age of 11. They've been told from the age of 11 you're going to be a professional footballer, right? They've been drip fed, you know, this bubble kind of dynamic till they're 16 and they can sign their first senior contract. When they get their first contract signed, they may only be on like 80 quid a week, 90 quid, 800, whatever it is, not a lot. When they get on that first team pitch, right, they have been drip fed. So already, and what's his name at Newcastle was on 800 quid a week. 800 quid a week, for a footballer, that's nothing. For an 18-year-old, that's a month's wages. Because the minimum wage for an 18-year-old is not a lot. So already, they're already earning 3, 4, 5 times what people their age in the wider community are earning as a wage if they're working. They're earning in a month what some will take home in 5 months, 6 months. They're already earning far more than people actually doing hard graft. By the time they're 21, they're on 15, 20, 30 grand a week, some of them even more. This is just an average. This is just average players, right? By the time they're 25, like Danny Rose, they're on 50k a week. When people in their, average kind of, let's say, postgraduate, let's go for someone who's been at university, got a postgraduate degree, might be lucky to get a job that pays 35k a year. So yeah, it is partly not their fault, but at the same time, there's the agents, so the club's willing to pay them and not hardball them. Plain and simple. If the clubs are a bit more firm, hey, we might have some money to go around and they won't be furloughing on playing staff. The clubs are overpaying the players. The agents have a massive part to play. And the players are greedy. Plain and simple. Let's not kid ourselves here. Let's not kid ourselves here. Yes, they do deserve to get paid a decent wage for a short career. But when they retire, they're not looked after in future career options. Come on. How many of these players do people actually give a toss about when they stop playing? Apart from the real big superstars. Not many. Plain and simple. How many players are actually properly looked after post-playing career? Let's think on that. The sport does not do enough with ex-players when they come to retire about what their options are. And it doesn't mean it's just football. This is union, rugby league, ice hockey, like the NHL. Professional sport does not do enough to look after athletes when they retire. A percentage of that, a small percentage will stay involved in the sport in a coaching capacity, in a media capacity, in an ambassadorial role capacity within clubs, behind the scenes in the boardroom. 90% will have nothing to do with football after that, or rugby league, or ice hockey, or cricket, tennis, whatever it is. They go on and do other things, and a lot of them end up broke, penniless, and riddled with addiction, homeless. Mental health issues is a big problem. So yeah, the sports bubble, it's not a new thing. It really isn't. You just have to listen to the amount of interviews given by ex-players about the issues they've had with depression, the issues they've had with addiction, and the issues they've had with relationship breakdown, issues with money, homelessness. It's there. It really is there. It's a thing. It So questions do have to be asked about what these wealthy sports. Look how much money's at the top of football. They can afford to look after these ex-players, right? They don't. They don't. The clubs make their money. The leagues make their money. It's up to the player to make sure he's financially responsible, and there's no one guiding these people from the age of 11 till, let's say, their mid-30s. It's 20 odd years, right? They're told they're going to be superstars. When it all ends, what they do? A lot of them do go into private business, such as, property management, building trade, used car sales, whatever it is, and make a good fist of doing things post playing. But a lot of them, yeah, unless they've been really wise with their finances, they have nothing to do, and a lot of them end up very destitute. And does the professional sport care? Nah, really. It's not a thing. Out of sight, out of mind. We've made our money off you. You're done. Bye bye. It's a thing. Not enough is done to support ex-athletes when they retire. There's a whole host of stories online about, and a lot of them do die young. So OCD is a mental illness. It does come under it. It comes under a form of anxiety. Straight up. OCD is a form of anxiety disorder. And it is classed as a mental illness, yes. Very interesting question. And it's very pertinent. The amount of you look at the amount of sports stars that have come out and mentioned their issues with substance abuse and depression and other mental health issues, and it's a thing. It's a thing. There's a big trend. In professional sport where there is a clear issue and not enough is done. And I hark back to the Sam Burgess, which I started the stream on, with the allegations of drug addiction or drug misuse and domestic violence. And that's why he's still playing. Oh well, look, I mean, they think it will hurt the brand if they say, look, we are being more socially aware. Really? Look, I think there is an issue with substance abuse in professional sport, and not anabolic steroids or EPO. That's doping. That's a different debate. No, there is an issue. It's not a new thing. It's there. It's known about. And now we've got the allegations against Sam Burgess, for example. He's not the first rugby league player to have these allegations of drug misuse and domestic violence against him. He won't be the last. Greg Inglis, former teammate of Sam Burgess, has been very open about his issues with bipolar. He was recently diagnosed with mental health issues, and alcoholism was part of his problem. And the media always spin it. The mainstream media are disgusting in how they spin it. I think the media has part to play. I think sport needs to be more responsible as an industry. Professional sport as an industry as a whole needs to be more responsible about how it looks after those who do retire from sport, or while they're even still playing. Because there's clearly an issue with addiction. There's clearly issues with substance abuse problems and domestic. It's there. Let's not pretend it's not. And unfortunately, these sports keep burying their heads in the sand when it comes to the debate about player athlete welfare. It's a thing. They expect these guys, and now in some cases girls, to play these really sometimes quite brutal sports and have a lot of injuries. Now, some of them have very short careers because of injury. They make their money off them, and then what? This is part of the problem. And when we found out that the NRL retirement fund was missing a third of its money during the heart of lockdown, it just shows you the lack of care these professional sports have for when players do retire, and their access to retirement funds and healthcare and job assistance. There's not enough done. They say they've got these programs in place where they have like these intervention programs for addiction problems like gambling. What are they called then? Because if they were really that accessible without that stigma, more players would take up and they wouldn't get caught out in the press and then shamed in the press for the issues that they have. Oh yeah, there needs to be more proper guidance and advice made out to the younger players about how to manage the money. Make sure they do have a second career option lined up post retirement, so they have got something to go into, so they're not struggling. I don't think it's done enough, and if it is, it's not as well advertised as it should be. Um, I think, yeah, players do need to be looked after better um, when they do retire, because at some point everyone has to retire, and at some point people do get unwell and have to take time off work. There needs to be more support around, especially for those players that do have regular injuries. There's a lot of players who are regularly going down with injuries whose careers are disrupted, and the mental health side of it is a problem. So that has to be taken into consideration. But I unfortunately don't see, in my eyes, looking outside the box inwards, enough positive action taken with player welfare. And it may well be the case that there are more discreet ways of looking after ex-players and current players, but they need to make them, I think, more public, so there is help available. No, gambling is Tony Adams, for example, has set up his addiction centre. Ex-football player, ex-Arsenal captain, and the amount of people going in there with gambling stuns him, and the amount of international athletes from all around the world during their various off seasons or when they've retired go to his addiction centre stuns him. I've seen lots of interviews about his addiction counselling service. It terrifies me that there's clearly an issue there, and these professional sports aren't doing nearly enough to support those involved um, in going down these avenues, because Tony Adams was very famously an alcoholic during his playing days. By the time Wenger came along, he had actually gone sober for, I think, 2 years by the time Wenger turned up. But during the 80s and the 90s, Tony Adams was famously quite a drunk individual. But post his playing days, that's what he. Oh, look, Paul Merson. God, I'm not a big fan of Merson. I understand, obviously, that drinking gambling is a problem for him, and addiction is an issue, but he doesn't help himself. Quite frankly. And he was also involved in a gambling advert for Sky Bet. So I have no sympathy for someone who's allowing himself to be manipulated in such a way by such an organisation such as Sky. But Paul Merson, he keeps relapsing. Tony Adams hasn't relapsed. There's the difference. Tony Adams has decided to do good in the community by helping out others. Paul Merson doesn't even help himself. I have very limited sympathy when you keep relapsing time and time again. Same with Paul Gascoigne. I mean, yes, it's a sad story, but there is some personal responsibility there, and there's only so much that people can do. But Gazza and Merson, I'm running out of sympathy for these individuals. At some point, you have to say, look, you've got to sort yourself out, because people have offered to help these people. And if you keep relapsing and relapsing and relapsing, there's only so much help you can give someone before they've got to help themselves. And if they're refusing to help themselves, then sectioning is the option. But there you go. Trust me, I've been through the mental health system. You are told to help yourself somewhat to a point, and then you can get other people willing to help you. Now, Paul Merson and Paul Gascoigne, I have very limited sympathy, but it is a sad tale where there were options for people to step in and intervene, which can backfire, but can have the benefits. And sorry to say, they don't want to have that help. Frank Bruno's a different case where he wanted the help. There's a difference when it comes to mental health and addiction problems. But Gazza and Merson, leave them to it now. Sorry. It's sad what's happened to them, yes, but they've had multiple opportunities to get the help. They've been offered the help, and they continue to basically don't want the help, basically. They don't want to help themselves, so let them go with it. There comes a point where you've got to go, I'm not going to bother to help this addict. There's others out there who are more willing to accept that they have an issue and want to have the help. Because otherwise you're just wasting time on someone where you could probably help 5 others for that one person, but they don't help themselves, but then the people around them don't help them either. You have to look at who surrounds these people. And this is where I come back to who's advising some of these athletes, who's guiding some of these athletes. yes, Frank Bruno basically I think it was his ex-wife came over with his daughter, I believe, and then they were like, "We're going to take you to hospital," and he basically was like, Frank Bruno was very famously let down by those around him, his agent, those with him, around him, but his family were the ones who actually helped him. And he's been, as far as I'm aware, actually quite well since then. But no, he was badly advised for a very long time and badly looked after. And this is where again you come back to the welfare of these people. There's obviously got people around people going, "This is not right. We've got to get you help." And then you've got helpers and enablers. And after a while, you've got to go, "Enough's enough. These people are. Let's just be done with them." Plain and simple. You know. Um, but it's harsh to say, but at some point you've got to go, "Well, we've tried." They don't want to, fix the problems. So be it. But again, I come back to who is advising these players and athletes. Who's around them, who they surround themselves with, and you can see some of them straying off the path, and others sticking to a good path, and then doing well post career. But a lot of them do go down a very slippery slope, and then addiction is unfortunately something that goes with that. And there have been some very high profile cases. Now, Sam Burgess is the latest high profile case where there is, um, allegations of domestic violence, and that's the difference. Addiction is one thing, but when you start becoming allegedly violent towards others, that's where there's a line. And if, as I say, these allegations prove to be true, then that's going to really rock, not just the NRL, but I think sport in general, because he's a well-known figure globally, Sam Burgess, and that's going to be a big, shaking of the tree. Let's see what comes out, because I think there were issues there that have dated back quite some time. Some of these allegations go back 2-3 years. That could be more damaging, I think, going forward. But we'll have to see what happens. Anyway, I'm going to leave that there. That's been an interesting little chat. I will have some more videos for you later on this weekend. But for now, thank you very much for watching. Place your thoughts, obviously, on any of the videos that I have. Adrian Morley, best English NRL player, in my view. Adrian Morley. And no discussion in that. And he's done well post-playing as well, because he's now got his own company. So he's a success story of doing well after sport. But Adrian Morley, I think, is the best English NRL player we've ever produced. Because you just look at the games he actually played as a professional. I think he's, in the modern era, he's played the most games as well. So Adrian Morley, check him out and check out his playing stats, because they're scary. But for now, I'm going to leave that there. Thanks for watching. I'll have some more videos for you very, very soon.